Now, if you ever ran across this picture, you would think it was a very homely little photograph of a gal from a long time ago. You wouldn't give it a second thought, would you? Can you hear me pretty well? Because I know it's reverberating in the room, and slow me down if you're not getting it clear enough, please. Okay. I have three aims in this talk. Aim number one is I need to establish the provenance of this little picture. The second is to identify correctly the sitter, as I call it in art speak, the subject of this little picture. And the third is to show that an image of historical interest to all of us here today was based on this portrait. Now, I ran across this portrait. The genesis of this was about 15 years ago when I started doing the work that ended up being a chapter in my book, and it was published as an article in Brief Chronicles called A Countess Transformed, which was to correctly identify the countess who is sitting to the viewer's left, our left, of the Earl of Pembroke, Philip Herbert. Art historians have been adamant for a few centuries that it is Ann Clifford, his second wife, and I believed, and other people have come on board too, that it is Susan Vere, his first wife. As part of this study, though, I went through everything, looked high and low, for everything I could find about Ann Clifford, and there was a ton of stuff about Ann Clifford, and everything I could find about Susan Vere, and there's next to nothing out there on Susan Vere. Now, as we know, Susan Vere is we know this, everybody in this room, I don't have to sell you on this. Susan Vere was in a pivotal position with the first folio because her husband, Philip Herbert, is one of the incomparable pair of brethren to whom it is dedicated, although English professors try not to notice that. And as we believe, her father, Edward de Vere, is the writer of the magnificent works that are in the first folio. Now, I believe that the Herbert family, really, this connection is so obvious, but I think that one of the reasons that the identity was changed to Ann Clifford is because they wanted to disguise this connection and just not have the rank and file people make that association. I'll go one step further, and I'm not the only one that believes that Susan Vere was one of the major forces, a driving force, in actually getting the first folio published. There were other forces out there that were coming together, but we believe she had a role to play. And as I said, I'm not the only one that thinks that. So here is our Susan in the Van Dyck, painted by Van Dyck, posthumously. Now, the verse that I knew about the little black and white photograph was in a book written by the first of the three 20th century biographies of Ann Clifford. This one was written by Dr. George C. Williamson. Dr. Williamson was one of the best scholars, a cultural historian, art historian in the early third of the 20th century. So what he thinks is worthwhile to factor in. And he wrote in his book, which about Ann Clifford, the first, again, of the biographies, he wrote this. He said, he noted a small portrait at Wilton House. He identified it as Lady Ann Clifford, writing that the likeness to that in the great Van Dyck is quite unmistakable. He went on to say, in his book, 1922, that this portrait had been forgotten for many years in an upstairs room, and was found in an upstairs room at Wilton House. And that is not as much of an oddity as you might think, because Wilton House you would think it had maybe this great stately home, one of the great homes of England, would have 30, 40, maybe 50 bedrooms. Actually, it had 100, according to one historian, it had 158 apartments. And some of them were so crammed with stuff you couldn't walk through them. So that's highly likely, yes. This painting just was lost in the shuffle of all that stuff for who knows how long. How many years, he does not say. But of course, this has given me the title of my talk today. It is most assuredly a portrait that time forgot. Now, the next notice of this portrait occurred in 1968 in the book called Paintings and Drawings at Wilton House. Very important book that told about, there were about 300 entries of paintings and drawings. And this particular little picture, they don't provide a photo of it. They just list it. It is listed as entry number 95 in this quite wonderful catalog. The catalog states, now they've got 3 paragraphs about it. Yay, it reads 3 paragraphs. They state that it is unknown when it came to Wilton House, when the painting came to Wilton House. If they know, they stated in the catalog, I've read through the whole catalog, which is very detailed and incredibly important to know about. But if they don't happen to know, it's not the only one they don't know. It's just there. They don't know when it came to Wilton House. But the comment that really got me was that it was cleaned and old repaints removed in 1950. Repaints or overpaints. They use the word repaints in this catalog for overpaints. And of course, quite a number of these very old portraits have been overpainted as the centuries have gone by. But this is exactly what it says, old repaints removed in 1950. So, of course, I wondered what that little black and white photograph would look like with the repaints having been cleaned off. My husband will tell you I wonder absently, idly wonder about a lot of things. So I was really wondering about this. And I set up I emailed, there's a gentleman, a couple, man and wife team in England who were researching the same thing I was about the Van Dyck and the identity of the Countess in the Van Dyck. And their article, was published in the deVere Society newsletter. It's a wonderful article. You can still get it. And I sent them an email and congratulated them. I sent it to them. And actually, the lovely gentleman responded to me. And I'd sent him a couple of things that they didn't know about, and he sent me something. And finally, he said, you know, the last time my wife and I were at Wilton House, I took a snapshot. There's a little portrait of, they say it's Lady Ann Clifford. Took a snapshot of it. Would you like to see it? Oh, wow. He said, I'll get out of my camera, get it in attachment, send it to you, which he did right away. Well, that's a lot better. That's an improvement, a step in the right direction here. So what we have here is the black and white photograph that was in Williamsons Book in 1922, and I guess it was about maybe 14, 15 years ago that this snapshot was taken and sent to me again by the lovely gentleman in England. Now, when I was touring, and some of you in this room were on that wonderful tour that we took in 2013, of the English tour that was set up, and we went to, at the very end, we went to Wilton House. One of the number one thing on my agenda was to get myself to Wilton House and see this picture. This is me, and that's someone else on the tour. You may recognize her. And I've always been told that if you want to draw a crowd, you stand and you point to something. And what? People will come around, and other people, so they saw us pointing, so actually a number of people took snapshots of this, and this is my collection of snapshots of the lovely little portrait, of the small portrait. The one that I'm going to use is this one on your far lower right, because it just happened to be the one that's the most straight on, and when you're talking about a portrait, you need to be as obviously a professional photographer can set up a tripod and it'd be square on, but that one is the most square on of all of this. Some are at different angles, and it's just better to have the one that's the straightest. As you can see, the difference between the one that, I like the hotter, warmer flesh tones better for the face, but that's what I'm using because it's the best angle, or the least any angle that to be taken in the photograph. So a few things about this portrait. First of all, it's relatively small. It is only 21 inches tall, 18 inches wide. A formal portrait would usually be about 40 inches tall and about 3 feet wide. So this is less than half that a really nice court formal portrait would be. It is on the small side. What we're looking at now, I bet you were wondering what we're looking at. It's going to help a lot to establish the provenance of this picture. Can't see it if you look at the upper right, far upper right, And there's some writing there that you can't see. Can't see it at all, can you? Nope, not a thing. Okay, now I'm going to get even closer, and I'm going to enhance it a little bit. Ta-da. It's the faint remains of a dadgum earlier identification. Isn't that what is far more wonderful than I'm even going to go through here? What it says is that initially, or some point in its lifetime of this portrait, it was identified as Alethia Talbot, the Countess of Arundel. So, what does Alethia Talbot, the Countess of Arundel, look like? This is Alethia Talbot. In a very famous court formal portrait, I think you can just eyeball it and tell that that's not Alethia Talbot, and somebody eventually figured that out. But before we leave this, why? What is Alethia Talbot doing here? What is the reason for this earlier identification? Well, William Herbert, the older brother of the incomparable pair of brethren, was married to her sister, Mary Talbot. This is the sister-in-law of the third Earl of Pembroke. So, I mean, it's connected. That makes sense. Oh, so why is it Alethia Talbot, the sister, and not Mary Talbot, the wife? The reason is simple. Mary Talbot is known to history as the hideous Talbot heiress. She was physically deformed, she was mentally deranged, she was a mess. And in the words of a contemporaneous commentator, the Earl of Pembroke paid much too dear for his wife's fortune by taking her person into the bargain. That's a famous quote, actually, yes. So you're at a generation or two or something in the future, and the curator at Wilton House or the archivist are saying, well, who is this person? Well, it can't be Mary Talbot. Maybe it's the sister, because they knew that she was horrible looking and ugly, and so they initially identified it as Alethia Talbot. Before I leave Alethia Talbot, which I think is, by the way, these faint remains of this earlier identification do go a long way to establishing the Wilton House provenance. But I also want you to notice the elaborate costume, the fancy lace, the elaborate setting in the background. This is the way a high-status woman in the court, in this, of course, Jacobean court, should be painted. She is a daughter of the Earl of Shrewsbury. She's the wife of the Earl of Arundel. She is a person of very, very high status at the time and should be painted with all of this elaborate stuff. So somebody finally figured out it wasn't Alethia Talbot. And the next identification we see up on the left, it's not showing up quite as much here. And in this case, they're identifying it now as Lady Ann Clifford. Let's see if this next one, shows up a little bit better. Here's Lady Ann Clifford. And this is what's on it that you can see today when you go to Wilton House. It says exactly, Anne, Countess of Dorset, afterwards Countess of Pembroke, with a miniature of the Earl of Dorset, died 1675. That is exactly what's there. Okay, well, let's look at what Lady Ann Clifford looked like. We've got some very good pictures of paintings of Lady Ann Clifford, painted by William Larkin, 1618, the same time Alethia Talbot was painted. We've got Paul Van Summer the next year. And notice the rich attire, the heavily embroidered dress, and the fancy lace and all that good stuff. Now, is this Ann Clifford? Anne, in her own diary, wrote, I have a peak of hair on my forehead and a dimple in my chin. Well, aside from the features, I don't think look like Susan, that look like the small portrait that we're talking about. There's no peak and there's no dimple. Don't think that's Ann Clifford. Another real interesting feature of this is they say, it says on it, died 1675. Well, guess what? Ann Clifford didn't die in 1675. She died in February of 1676, which tells me that they are still, when this is put on, England is still in old-style dating. They didn't switch over to new-style dating, which would be 1676. When they ran the dating through the first 3 months of the following year, this is actually correct in the old-style dating. This is correct in new-style dating, but they're still in old-style dating, so this inscription was put on prior to England switching over to new-style dating in 1752, to be exact, circa 1750, okay? It's wonderful for dating the antiquity of this thing, and of course we know Alethia Talbot came earlier, so we got this thing at Wilton House, and the curators there, and librarians and people in charge of the stuff are trying to figure out who it is. But this inscription was clearly put on sometime after Anne died in 1676 and before England switched over to New Style dating. Now, okay, I've already gone through that. Now we get to something else that is a bit of a curiosity. It's identifying Anne as the Countess of Dorset from her first husband's title and her first marriage. This is interesting because whoever put this inscription on is gauging an age of the sitter to be in her early to mid-30s when she is still the Countess of Dorset. Isn't that very, very nice? Because we're honing in on the date that this painting was done. This would date the portrait to the early 1620s. I'm happy with that date. So just to recapitulate a bit, the two inscriptions that are on it, that are on the painting, both are wrong, but they're both there, and they both actually access the identification of the two incomparable pair brethren. The Arundel, Countess of Arundel, was the sister-in-law of the older brother, and Ann Clifford was the second wife of the younger brother. So it's all dealing with a Herbert family of these elite countesses related and connected to the Herberts of Wilton House. Now, I think I've accomplished aim number one. I hope so. Trying to. And also, I think I've established that the lady is not Alethia Talbot, and the lady's not Ann Clifford, and the painting is dated from the 1620s. Another little recap right there. But this is not a formal court portrait. It just flat isn't for the following reasons. It's much too small. The sitter is not in the elaborate court attire that would be expected of a countess, nor is it in an elaborate setting. The simplicity of this thing is quite unusual. It's very unusual. So is it for a countess? Well, is she a countess? Or do we have somebody else here? She's wearing what looks to me to, and I've studied it carefully, it looks to be black silk, which should be a rich fabric. She's wearing expensive jewelry. Just a single strand of pearls was considered very fine jewelry at that time. She's wearing a miniature portrait of somebody, and the low-cut dress, the low-cut bodice was fashionable during the reign of King James. Something else that I just recently learned that is so wonderful too. I hate to say something nice about a Stratfordian authority, but Tanya Cooper, if you want to get really terrific books, she has several out there about early English painting, Elizabethan Jacobean. She has one called Elizabeth I and Her People, in which she notes, and I went through the whole thing and she's right, non-aristocratic women are depicted with their heads completely covered, and aristocratic women, quote, revealed their hair. You definitely have a coiffed countess here. But we do have a unique portrait that is informal of a noble woman, I suggest to you, in her country manor home. So who is it? Oh, and don't forget to notice, actually this will grow on you a little bit, the confidence. At first you thought it was kind of homely when you saw the black and white, but take a look. A woman of confidence and dignity and grace is beginning to take shape, I think. So, when the overpaint was removed, according to the paintings and drawings at Wilton House, it was removed in 1950. A little landscape appeared along the side, okay? And that is, I now have the detail from it, and you can see very, very clearly a tree. In fact, it was pointed out to me, it's such a neat, unusually bifurcated tree trunk that somebody pointed out that it's in the shape of a perfect V. Would V be for Vere? I don't know. Somebody pointed that out to me, and I just wanted to share that little tidbit. Going back to the tree. Now, there was a story very well known in the Renaissance called Susanna and the Elders. I'm going to be following Adam Nicholson's account in his book about the Pembroke family. It was painted also by several great Renaissance painters painted it. It's a story from the apocryphal book of Daniel, and it goes like this. Susanna is described as beautiful and righteous, but when she was walking in her garden, two old men saw her, and their lust was inflamed toward her. She refused them, and for revenge, they tried to have her executed, claiming that they had seen her with a young man. Daniel questioned the old men and asked them what sort of tree she had been supposedly lying under with the young man, and one said it was a large oak tree, and the other said it was a small elm tree. Because of the conflicting stories of the tree, Susanna's life was spared. So the tree is crucial evidence in establishing her innocence of the charges. However, was this associated with Susan Vere, the story? Ben Jonson thought so. In his famous series of epigrams in 1616, he wrote this one to Susan, Countess of Montgomery. Were they that named you prophets? Did they see, even in the dew of grace, what you would be? Or did our times require it to behold a new Susanna equal to that of old? It's very beautiful. And yes, the story of Susanna and the Elders and the righteousness and virtuousness and general wonderfulness of Susan Vere is being recognized in this poem. Before I leave this, an identifying feature would be the miniature if we could see it more clearly. This is as clear as I can get it. The black and white, from the black and white photo, it's too muddled to really tell much of anything. This is as clear as I can get it. It's kind of inconclusive to me who this is, but once again, going back to Dr. Williamson, he was an expert who wrote the early biography of Ann Clifford. He was also an expert on miniatures, one of the leading experts of the time, and he believes it's Lord Pembroke. In the single paragraph, he calls it Lord Pembroke. And the Earl of Pembroke, Philip Herbert, did have the two miniatures that I know of painted of him. So I'm not sure about that, but I'm just giving you that to consider. As far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit inconclusive, but for sure, if Dr. Williamson didn't think it was the Earl of Dorset, that he was probably right about that. And Anne Clifford would not be wearing a miniature of Lord Pembroke. So go figure on that one. Okay, now I want you to look at a portrait. So what did Susan look like? This portrait is today in the Dulwich Picture Gallery and in London. And in 1842, in a catalogue of 1842, and you can access this on the internet, this was identified as Susan Vere, this portrait. They have since then said it is an unknown lady in blue. We get no help. We don't get anybody trying to help us out here. But I want to show you how they match. Of course, the receding hairline and the very, very interesting bald spot that is going down and the tuft of hair coming up on the other side of the bald spot. That's a unique feature. I haven't seen that in any other portrait, and I've gone through every major book of early English portraiture. She had especially high arched eyebrows, which you see there. She had a slight, more than a slight dip, maybe a more pronounced dip under her lower lip, which is where the mentalis muscle is. Some people have a real deep dip there. Some people do, some people don't. I personally don't. I was looking at myself in the mirror. No, I don't think I have that. But a lot of people have a deep dip here, which shows up with shading from the artist in both of these pictures, and it really sets off nicely her pert little round chin. Yeah, okay. The ringlets that her hair is in, I believe, were inspired by her costuming when she danced in the Masque of Queens in 1609. This was her costuming, designed for her by the great impresario Inigo Jones. Her hair is in ringlets, the dress is square cut, and the cape flows around her shoulder. And I believe that this is the prototype for the costuming that we are seeing her in at a later date. So I'm offering you that The small portrait identified as Anne Clifford is actually, of course, Susan Vere for these reasons. It is the likeness with the portrait of Susan at Dulwich Picture Gallery. It's got the sliver of landscape, which evokes the story of Susanna. Her hair is in ringlets, and the rest of her costuming looks very much to have been inspired by what Inigo Jones designed for her in a mask. And they love masking. That was just a big deal for them. So I offer that this is Susan Vere, and don't forget, the little painting is a very unusual painting. Now, when the lovely gentleman from England that I was communicating with sent me this face, the snapshot, and it was an afterthought. He had snapped it as an afterthought, kind of sent, oh, by the way, I'll send it to you if you want it. Oh, yeah. And I sat in front of my computer screen. I couldn't wait to open it, and it's fairly big on my desktop screen. And I looked at it, and I had a shudder of recognition. Something in this face I've seen somewhere before. Oh my God. That's what I sat in front of my computer screen and thought. Now, before I go any further, I want to do a little bit about the Droeshout. We all know that it was actually in another phase after this, but this is from the Folger Shakespeare Library's website. It had phase 1 and phase 2. They worked on it to make it more masculine looking. Phase 1, as you can see from phase 1 to phase 2, they added shadows. They didn't really add any more whiskers, but they darkened it so it looked like he had more whiskers. From phase 1 to phase 2, they put shadows around the neck onto the ruff. There's shadows in the background. They really, which is important to know that they were working on it to darken it, clearly. Now, if you haven't seen the video on the Shakespeare Coalition website, Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, please look at it. It's called the Impossible Doublet. It's a beautiful representation of exactly how the doublet was painted or engraved. That a tailor in 1911 pointed out that it came from, that the doublet is not from real life, from the way a doublet would be worn, that it comes from a tailor's pattern. And in the video that's on the website, it shows that very, very clearly. It goes through it very carefully, in great detail. So if you haven't seen it yet, be sure you get the Impossible Doublet. Very, very good video that the Coalition has on that. So I'm not going to talk about that. Now, everybody believes that the head is too big for the body. None other than Catherine Duncan Jones. Does she ever have great strat credentials or what? Catherine Duncan Jones believes that the doublet was likely engraved by another engraver. She thinks you had two engravers here, and I believe she's right. I think somebody engraved the doublet, then they put the stylized ruff on top, and then they plopped the head on top of the ruff. She thinks so too. Makes sense to me. There were two engravers. And the face was added later. Everybody, including Duncan Jones, believe that this face is based on a larger portrait or a sketch or a miniature of their man from Stratford. But Stratfordians have no idea. They have never suggested what particular picture it could be based on. No idea. Now, something I want to contradict. Good, you're getting a laugh out of it. They love to call the broad-based forehead hydrocephalic. I've read that word, you have too, quite a few times. When they talk about the Droeshout, they talk about his hydrocephalic forehead. Actually, no. This is a very standard male forehead and eyebrow placement. Foreheads are taller, wider, usually, especially if a balding guy will have a higher forehead look, and eyebrow placement's lower on most male faces and female faces. Like this any better? But it's a standard placement. That the engraver apparently understood that when he was, okay. Now, you're probably getting ahead of me, and if you're thinking that I'm offering to you that the female face was transitioned in a trans face to be a male face, this is, of course, exactly what I am saying here. Yes, we have a trans face. Now, I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to show you the morph. I'm going to show you a morph. I'm going to show you how the female face, there we start with a drosh out. And let's see if it's going to pick up here. Yeah, okay. When this was done for me by a gentleman in Canada, it was more than a dozen years ago, and I didn't have the better photograph of Susan to be using, but it shows pretty well what the deal is. Her face just pops out. Now, what he had to do, with, what the engraver had to do were three things. First of all, obviously, he had to widen the forehead. The second thing that he did is very interesting. To lower the brows, which is more what a male face would look like, he used what's called, and it's actually darkened and shaded in Susan's face. It's called the supraorbital area above her eye sockets, the supraorbital area, and that's where he lowered the brows to for this one. And then, of course, he added the whiskers, and that's pretty easy for an engraver to do. None of that's difficult. So there it is, lower eyebrows, wider forehead, whiskers. Now, I'm going to show you 10 matches. When law enforcement's looking for a match in fingerprints or something, they got to have specific places that they match. And so I'm going to show you 10 of them. First, the contours of the face match remarkably, which is one reason why it morphs so well. It's a perfect overlay. The contours, the outline, and you can see it from that as it comes in here, as it comes into the cheek. Unfortunately, we can't see the cheek, her cheek going up because it's hidden by her ringlet hairdo, but that is a match. Now, this is an interesting match that I read when I was reading Catherine Duncan Jones' book about the portraits of Shakespeare. They believe, and I'm using her because the book was published by the Oxford Bodleian Library, so obviously it's representing what they think. They believe that the portrait, whatever portrait this came from, was made from life when Mr. Shakespeare was about 35 years old. And Catherine Duncan Jones offers the date of 1599. At which point Mr. Shakespeare would have been 35 years old. Now, I am offering the date of the Susan painted in 1623, which would be when Susan was 35 years old. But that's significant because you don't have an old man, you don't have an old woman's face, you don't have a young man, you don't have a young woman's face. You're looking at basically the same age individual here, which I believe is a match. Third, the features are in the identical proportions. They're set the same, and they're in identical proportions, which is extremely important. I'll show you more what that is. The eyes are the same distance apart. You have the same distance down to the mouth. The mouth is the same, and it comes down into, you can just see how it overlays. Now, match number 4. I'm doing this as a separate match because there are two measurements here for the eyes that are extremely important to match. The inner cathy, right here, the inner of the inner lines in the red arrow, that's exact. Sometimes people have farther set eyes, sometimes closer set eyes, that's exact. And then the little square, that is a match from the center of the pupils from the eyes, and they match. So you've got the distance, but you've got really perfect fit there. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you. Now I'm going to run this through several times, 2 times at least. And this is a morph of the eyes of the Droeshout turning into the eyes of Susan, and I'm going to do it twice. So watch hard, carefully focus on one of the eyes, and then we're going to do the other eye, whichever. Okay? Oh, let's see what I can do here. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Watch an eye. Now you see Susan's eyes. I'm going to do it again. We start with the Droeshout's eyes. And the reason it's such a perfect overlay is because the shape's the same. The matching of all this other stuff is the same. And we end up with Susan's eyes. And the level of slightly lowering the left eye is exactly the same. I'm not good at all this stuff, but I have done a reasonably decent job of scaling it correctly, I think. Forgive me if I'm trying to give myself a nice thought here, because I've worked on it long and hard. We have identical eyes. Now, this is interesting. This is called the alar crease. And these early artists and portrait painters didn't usually emphasize it very much. They paint a nose, and they wouldn't. This alar crease is this indentation across the left side of her nose, which, as I said here, you see it quite noticeably. The nostrils the same amount, the same distance, and nostrils can be made very differently. And then this part of the nose that comes down called the columella, it's the same. This part of the nose matches. Now, the mustache, of course, it kind of, you may not really quite realize this, but there is an identical difference from the bottom of the nose to the top of the lip. That is a feminine characteristic that the engraver stayed with. He copied this distance. To show you again, generally men have more distance in this area. I like Bruce Willis. I use this because I like looking at him. But that illustrates it. I could do lots of other faces, but much more distance. But the engraver kept the feminine qualities here, the feminine feature. Okay, Susan had a relatively wide and pronounced medial cleft under her nose, which is copied here by the engraver, but he puts a little bit of mustache shading there to sort of make it not quite as noticeable, but basically he's copied the medial cleft with one little interesting thing. The medial cleft is out of place in Mr. Rochow's work. He had moved the mouth over a little bit so that the medial cleft is under the left nostril, and it looks like his mustache is coming out of his left nostril. And that has been commented on many, many, many times as sort of an oddity of the whole thing. There are two reasons for it that I can think, which by the way, leaves a teeny bit more room for this contour. Here, she has a little less room before the end of her mouth and the end of her face there. But I can think of two reasons why he did that. First of all, is he just made a mistake. He started to scratch, because engravers are literally scratching these images into copper plate, and it's very unforgiving. If you make a mistake, you're stuck with it, or you throw out the copper plate and start over again. So either he started out and he had the mouth set in slightly wrong place, or he did it deliberately to be cartoonish and comical and kind of a joke. I personally believe the second reason. I think it's just deliberately meant to be cartoonish. To emphasize it more, well, her lips are in a perfect Cupid's bow. And his lips are in a Cupid's bow, but sort of an exaggerated Cupid's bow with thinner lips. And once again, that gives it sort of a Harlequin-esque comical look, the Cupid's bow. It's really not a real looking Cupid's bow. It's sort of distorted looking. This whole area with the mouth and the mustache coming out of his nostril is sort of a distortion, I think, for fun. Now, this is interesting. On the Susan Vere, you can see this bulb of her head, which has been shaded a little bit to the left by the artist. So you really notice that she has a bulb on her forehead. The bulb that's been commented upon many times on the Rochow is exactly the same, in exactly the same place for the light to hit it. And that has been noticed many a time. Another, match number 10, is if you start at the inner cathy of the left eye, the balding man's hairline is coming down right where her bald spot is. Kind of an interesting oddity. So, we're going to go back now to take a look at the Dulwich Picture Gallery's painting of Susan Vere. And I'm going to share with you there's only one feature that doesn't match as well as I wish it did. Now, I want you to study carefully. Take a good look at what I'm going to show you. It's Susan's, it's the nose on the Susan painting, the small Susan. It's a hook nose, curves down. The Droeshout has what is called a bumpy nose. It's a nose that is prominent at the nasal bone, sinks into the cartilage, and bumps out at the end, and balls out at the end. In fact, Meryl Streep has a bumpy nose. That's Meryl Streep's nose. I believe that if you look closely at the Dulwich picture, Susan, that you can see she has a bumpy nose. It's bigger at the nasal bone, it's sinking in, because they have her turned a little bit more to the straight, it straightens it out a little bit, but this is all we have, and I suggest to you that this is the kind of nose that Susan really had. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is a picture. It's a photograph. It's been on the internet for a lot of years. It's been going around. And if you've seen it before and you know who this is, please don't say it. So if you don't know who it is, but you'd like to guess, just raise your hand, okay? But nobody say anything. Okay. Who is this? You think you know? Shh, 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 shh. Okay. It's been around on the internet for a long, long time, for a while, right? Who is it? Now, do you recognize this person? Oh, my dear, yes. It's Jennifer Grey before and after she had what she calls the nose job from hell. It's a much prettier, more typically short little nose, but it so totally changed her appearance that when she'd go to a Hollywood event, no one would recognize her, and it totally upended her career because it destroyed her iconic looks. She'd never had another major role after she had her nose job from hell. That shows you how important a nose is to the recognition and the perception that we have of a person's face. So, what I thought, I've looked at this, we're back to the black and white picture, and if you can see there, it kind of looks like a big batch of flesh-colored paint was dumped on her nose to turn it into a hook nose. It kind of does show up that it's a bigger hook nose. So, we know that the paint was removed in 1950, and it occurred to me that the painting on her face was imperfectly removed to still give the look of a hook nose, that they just didn't get off all the paint. I wondered about this. I studied on it. And I found a wonderful article in the Courtauld Institute of Art in England. Fabulous Institute of Art. And I found an article right smack on point. It was the study of a painting that was done in 1608, and it's a recent study. It was published in 2018. So we're looking at a very recent work where the conservationist and restorers at the Courtauld are trying to get overpaint off of an old Jacobean portrait. And guess what? They get and the article's very long. It's over 30 pages, where they say exactly what they did here and exactly the machinery, the state-of-the-art stuff they were using to determine what was overpaint, and this was the problem. Arguably, then this is from the conservation report, arguably the most disfiguring, they use the word disfiguring, overpaint is the facial strengthening. They called it facial strengthening, paint on the face. That appears to have been applied directly onto the original paint layer, which is, I think, what we were seeing with the Susan painting. And they wrote they couldn't tell where the old paint, the original paint stopped and the overpaint started. They just couldn't tell. The extent and condition of the surviving original paint remain unclear. They don't know. They can't determine. And they have, when I say state-of-the-art stuff, I had to laugh at what they were using that you didn't have, and I don't think in 1950. They did elemental analysis with scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry. And they still couldn't, as this report went, figure it out. So I have a leg to stand on, that this nose was not totally that the overpaint wasn't correctly and perfectly taken off the nose, so we still have a hook nose and not a bumpy nose. So what I did is I took We go back to the Dulwich nose, and I put a bumpy nose on Susan, which is what I think it originally had. There. That's Susan with a bumpy nose instead of the hook nose. I got rid of it. I think that is much closer to what was really there. And then just for fun, I widened the forehead up at the left. Have any trouble seeing it now? And if I could do it, you know, a skilled engraver in to do the forehead had no trouble at all. So that is, I believe, of course, with a bumpy nose is what the painting really first looked like, and of course the engraver made it more masculine with a wider forehead when he etched the Drochet engraving. So we have, to close, 4 images of Susan Vere. We have her in the great Van Dyck at Wilton House. We have her in the Dulwich Picture Gallery, which I think is the closest rendition, it was a very close rendition of what she really looked like. We have the small painting, and then that's really not a likeness. Inigo Jones' sketch is not a likeness, but it does show the prototype of her costuming that she's wearing later in life. Do we have a 5th image of Susan? Do we? Ben Jonson wrote in the introduction to the first folio this remarkable line. Of course, we know in the frontispiece he tells you, but don't look at his picture, look at the book. But in the body of his introduction, he writes, look how the Father's face lives in his issue. I rest my case.
So you'll get questions at lunch?
Yes, we're right at 12:30.
Yeah.
So we go to lunch.
Yes.
Why don't I just take questions at lunch?
Okay, that sounds good. Let me...
Because I know that this is going to take some time to process. I've been working on it for well over a dozen years, longer than that. And I've worked and studied faces. And there's going to be I know that this will take some time to process. Think about it. You're going to have questions later. Please contact me, come up and talk to me. Anything you think about, I'll love to hear what you think. But it's going to take some time, and I understand that.
Thank you, Bonner. It was wonderful. Let me invite Dorothea and Ben up, and we're going to, please stay in your seats. There's some exciting news from the Fundraising and Membership Committee, and I just want to get it done now, and then we'll go to lunch. Wait. Oh, they're behind me. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Come on, Dorothy. So, at the beginning of this year's session, the Fundraising and Membership Committee started by just, coming to the understanding that we're all here to advance the theory that we all share and care about of Edward de Vere being the real author. So we started with that, and then we realized, fundraising and membership is not just about trying to ask for money 100 times a year, but it's about giving you a reason to give your money, to invest in what we're trying to accomplish. So it's about ideas. It's about how can we come up with new ideas and better ideas to get our ideas. In this, the talk that Bonner just gave and the various talks that we've heard are just amazing. And this is all done by volunteer work, which is free to us as a group. But there are other projects that require money. And we've had a few pop up this year. Dorothea came up with one that we're very excited about. It does take money, as many other ideas will in the future. So Dorothea is going to share it with you, share you what some of the scope is and the possibilities are, and then hopefully you'll all see what we're working on in the background and what we're asking you to invest in. And then I'm going to tell you after she's done about a new membership level that we have.
Hi there. So our website is our living room. It's where we as members communicate with each other. It's also our front door through which people who search for us on the internet come. Hopefully they spend some time, become more familiar with what's on our website, and ultimately become members. The website was begun in 2002, and it went through its last major renovation in 2013 and 2014. In January of this year, I outlined a proposal, and the Board of Trustees voted to invest in improving our website's content and other social media presence with 3 goals in mind. The first goal was improving our ranking in internet searches for terms like the Earl of Oxford, who wrote Shakespeare, even the name of that guy from Stratford. We want it accepted worldwide as a fact that Shakespeare was not some grain-hoarding churl, but rather a very erudite earl. The second goal was to encourage visitors to spend more time learning on our site. And this includes millennials and Gen Zs. So using a 24/7 internet-driven outreach program through the website and our social media platforms is another goal. The third goal is to improve our website for members, to make it more enjoyable and more useful for you. So in February, we conducted a competitive bid process. We had bids from national providers as well as smaller companies to choose someone to do the technical background that this is a major part of this project. And Jennifer was selected. You may know she has been the main architect of our website since 2013. Her creativity is awesome. To accomplish the first and second goals, Jennifer and I are leveraging the website search engine capabilities, commonly called SEO. You may have heard of the term search engine optimization. And what that means is when a searcher puts in certain words, if your website happens to contain them, the Google algorithm will draw that searcher to those websites. We also took a look at what our website was missing in this regard. So we call it Google because Google has about 87% of the engine business on the website. And that algorithm, which is driven by artificial intelligence, it works even when we are all asleep. And it ranks us vis-a-vis our competitors. So what websites are our competitors? Well, certainly the deVere Society, certainly the Folger, certainly the SAQ, and our biggest competitor is Wikipedia. To improve those rankings, you may or may not be noticing that there are significant changes going into our website. We are integrating more keywords that people commonly use in searches. We are including more photos, more captions, and most importantly, we are including a lot of videos. Videos hold eyes on websites. The SOF interviews that Bob started this year has garnered 13,000 views of our website in the last month. Over the history of our website, now we have 134 videos. A lot of them are on YouTube. There'll be more videos from this conference that will go on. We've garnered 600,000 views just to the videos. We also have links to some new social media sites. Phoebe Neer's Oxfordian TikTok has been mentioned. We are looking to put up a link onto LinkedIn. For those of you who are on LinkedIn, please link to me. For those of you who are not yet on LinkedIn, please put up your profiles and link to me, because corporate LinkedIn accounts need a certain number of people behind them in order to be launched. I'd appreciate your help. Don Rubin put it really beautifully. He said, "We want to own the algorithm." Jennifer and I are discovering who visits our website based on what they search for. And contrary to what you may have heard from others, we do have a significant number of Gen Zs and millennials who find us. And so we are changing our content to be more compatible with the types of searches they do. We also found out what we're not doing well, and one of our serious failings was we did not do well by our Earl. The information we had on him was really dense, very academic, and buried under paragraphs and paragraphs about, God forbid, Will of Stratford. So we are creating a biographical page, a landing page for our Earl, full of text, full of photos, and full of videos, which will be more accurate than Wikipedia, and we are calling it Oxford's Wiki Alt page. We are also doing a series of short reviews of our best articles and books. Again, we are very text dense. People on the internet are not necessarily patient. We will include links to the full works, but we are trying to do shorts of those on it. To meet our third goal, we are creating a new members-only section on the website. You will only be able to access it if you are a member. It will contain, when it's finished, the Oxfordian, the Blue Boar Tavern, links to the many book clubs, Oxfordian book clubs that all sorts of people are involved in. We will have a cork board where you can post your research questions, or if you have collaborative projects, you're looking for colleagues. And we're going to have an adopt a project box where some of those projects that we just don't have the person power to get off the ground can be adopted by members who are interested in volunteering. Because it is your site, we are also going to send around a questionnaire so that you can tell us what you are looking for on your membership site. This is an enormous project. It will take years. The analytics and the innovation will last as long as there is an internet and an SOF that is determined to get the word out about Oxford. So, like any good project, we have a slogan and a directive. And that slogan and a directive is Google Edward de Vere. It is both a slogan, it is also a directive. And on t-shirts and on stickers is a QR code. If you take your phone and you scan it, or you get somebody else to scan it, it will take you directly to our website. There are a limited number of these stickers that will be available at this concert. They are free to those of you who came. I think we may have some t-shirts. I think there's going to be a price for those. And we'll put up a link on the website. We need to renew our stock so that people who are not here, or you can purchase more in the future. So wear your t-shirts with pride. Put your stickers on anything you personally own. This lawyer is begging you, do not put it on someone else's property unless you have their permission. And I am going to, of course, say, yes, the software costs money, but what really costs money is the technical assistance to make this happen, without which none of this will happen. So at the moment, we are working within our budget, but if that budget were 2 or 3 times larger, we would do it faster and we would spread Oxford's wings more completely. So I thank you for listening, and I want to ask you one more time, what is it you're going to tell people to do? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorothy. So I just want to say quickly, we have a new membership level, and this year I read Jim Warren's book, Shakespeare Revolutionized, and it gave me a great appreciation for the people who came, 100 years before us, trying to do the same thing that we're now trying to do. This is a long process. I think everybody here hopes that we'll be alive to see Edward de Vere recognized in some significant way. It's going to take money. It's going to take projects like what Dorothy has just described to get that done, and that's going to take money. And the more we get, the better off we'll be. So there's a new membership level that we're promoting called lifetime membership. All of the board members, and if you don't mind just standing up, board members, just so everybody could see you, All of us, and Earl, but all of us have pledged to become lifetime members. And that will probably be the new standard. We'd like to invite you all to become lifetime members. It's a lifetime process. And again, it'd be great if we could all be here announcing that we won. So the lifetime membership is $1,550. It's a one-time payment. If you want a family membership, it's $1,604. There are several perks that go along with this. I'm going to go real quickly. A lapel pin tire scarf that recognizes that lifetime membership. Recognition in the next quarterly newsletter after you become a member. Inclusion on a website page that we'll build that will permanently show all our lifetime members, and we'll probably recognize some people who have passed away as well. So it'll be like a hall of fame in a way. Invitation to a special reception we'll have in the future at our annual meetings. Membership for free, of course, in the future. You'll receive an annual report that's specially made, a summary, to go to so you understand where your money is going to, and then $50 worth of swag from our store. So I hope you will all consider becoming a lifetime member at this conference. I think Alex or Bob or somebody or Jose can, if you are prepared to do that, can take that donation. Thank you very much.